The black maid's hands trembled as she whispered something into the little girl's ear. In that moment, Richard Montgomery, the richest man in California, a man who built his fortune on cold logic and hard facts, felt his entire world crack open like an egg. His daughter, Emma, who hadn't spoken a single word in 3 years, suddenly turned her head. Her lips parted. And then, impossibly, she smiled. Richard's knees nearly buckled. The doctors had said it was permanent. The therapists had given up. His wife had left because she couldn't bear the silence anymore. For 3 long years, he had watched his daughter live in a prison of silence, her eyes empty, her voice stolen by a tragedy no 8-year-old should ever witness. But now, this elderly woman, this maid he'd hired just 2 weeks ago without even looking at her resume, had done something in 30 seconds that an army of expensive specialists couldn't do in 3 years. What did she say? What could she possibly have said? Richard stood frozen in the doorway of his mansion's grand living room, watching as the maid gently stroked Emma's hair. The old woman's face was calm, peaceful, as if miracles were just part of her daily routine. She looked up at him with eyes that seemed to see straight through his $3,000 suit and into his very soul. "Mr. Montgomery," she said softly, "your daughter has something she wants to tell you. Welcome to stories where wealth meets humanity and every moment reveals the unexpected. Subscribe now for more powerful billionaire stories that will move and inspire you." Let me take you back to where this all began. 3 weeks earlier, Richard Montgomery was having the worst morning of his already difficult life. He sat in his enormous office on the 45th floor of Montgomery Tower, staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. Outside his window, Los Angeles spread out like a glittering toy city, but Richard felt no joy looking at it. He owned half the buildings he could see. His company, Montgomery Industries, was worth $12 billion. He had houses in 5 countries, cars that cost more than most people's homes, and a watch that could pay for someone's college education. But none of it mattered. His phone buzzed. It was Margaret, his personal assistant, calling for the 5th time that morning. He ignored it. She was probably calling about another nanny who had quit. That would make 7 in 3 months. Richard rubbed his tired eyes. He hadn't slept properly in years. Every night, he lay awake in his enormous empty bed, listening to the silence of his enormous empty house, thinking about his enormous empty life. His daughter was the only thing that mattered anymore. Emma, his beautiful, brilliant Emma, who used to laugh like wind chimes and ask a million questions about everything. Emma, who used to dance in the rain and make up songs about butterflies. Emma, who used to call him Daddy, in a voice so sweet it could melt his heart even during his most stressful business meetings. That Emma was gone. 3 years ago, Emma had been in the car with her mother, Richard's wife, Sarah. They were driving home from Emma's dance recital. Emma had performed beautifully that day. Richard had missed it, of course, because of some meeting he couldn't even remember now. Sarah had recorded it on her phone. Richard would never watch that video, because it was the last time Emma danced. A drunk driver had crossed the median on the highway. The crash wasn't even that bad, the police had said. Sarah had walked away with just a broken arm. But Emma, sitting in the back seat, had seen everything. She had watched the other car coming. She had heard her mother scream. She had felt the impact, the spinning, the glass breaking, the terrible sounds of metal crushing metal. And then, Emma stopped talking. The doctors called it selective mutism triggered by trauma. They said with time and therapy, she might speak again. But 3 years had passed. 3 years of the best child psychologists money could buy. 3 years of treatments and therapies and specialists flying in from around the world. 3 years of Richard watching his daughter slip further and further away into her silent world. Sarah had left 2 years ago. She'd said she couldn't take it anymore. The guilt of the accident, even though it wasn't her fault. The pain of watching Emma's silence. The feeling that she'd lost her daughter even though Emma was still alive. She'd moved to Boston and barely called anymore. She sent expensive presents on Emma's birthday, but never visited. Richard couldn't blame her. Some days he wanted to run away too. But Emma was all he had left. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered. "What is it, Margaret?" "Mr. Montgomery, I'm sorry to bother you, But we have a situation. The new nanny, Mrs. Patterson, she just quit. She left 15 minutes ago. Richard felt anger flash through him, hot and sudden. What? She's only been there for 4 days. What happened? Margaret's voice was hesitant. She said Emma threw a plate at her during lunch, and that the job wasn't worth the stress, no matter how much we were paying her. Richard slumped in his chair. Emma had been getting worse lately. More tantrums, more anger. She would throw things, slam doors, lock herself in her room for hours. The doctors said it was frustration at not being able to communicate. They said it was normal for her condition. But Richard knew it was more than that. Emma was lonely. She was trapped. And she was only 8 years old, facing a life sentence of silence that even he, with all his billions, couldn't break. Call the agency again, Richard said, his voice tired. Tell them we need someone immediately. I have meetings all afternoon. I can't leave work to. Sir, I already called them. They said they can't help us anymore. We've gone through too many of their staff. They've basically blacklisted us. Richard closed his eyes. Of course they had. Then call a different agency. Call all of them. Offer double the normal rate. Triple. I don't care what it costs. I've already tried 3 other agencies this morning, Mr. Montgomery. They've all heard about the situation. No one wants to take the job. Richard felt panic rising in his chest. Margaret, I have the Nakamura meeting at 3. This deal is worth $400 million. I can't cancel it. Emma can't be alone in that house. There has to be someone. Actually, sir, Margaret interrupted. There might be someone. A woman called about an hour ago. She saw our listing online, the one I posted on that general job site as a last resort. She says she has experience with difficult children. She's available to start immediately. Richard felt a tiny bit of hope. Did you check her references? Well, that's the thing. She doesn't really have formal references. She's older, in her 60s, and she says she's been doing private care work for families, mostly paid in cash. But sir, I spoke with her on the phone, and there was something about her voice. She sounded, genuine, kind. I have a good feeling about her. Richard almost laughed. A good feeling. That's what his life had come to. Making decisions about his daughter's care based on his assistant's feelings. But what choice did he have? Fine. Send her to the house. Have security check her ID. I'll try to get home early to meet her. Her name is Dorothy. Dorothy Williams. She should arrive within the hour. Richard ended the call and turned back to his computer. But he couldn't focus on the numbers and reports in front of him. His mind kept drifting to Emma, alone in that big house, surrounded by toys she didn't play with, in front of a television she didn't watch, trapped in a silence no child should know. He had failed her. He knew that. He'd been so focused on building his empire that he'd missed the things that mattered. He'd missed that recital. He'd missed so many recitals, so many school events, so many bedtimes and breakfasts and ordinary moments that he'd thought he could make up for later. But there was no later. Not anymore. Richard had everything money could buy, but he would have traded it all. Every penny, every building, every success, for just one word from his daughter's lips. Just one word. Daddy. But miracles didn't exist. Richard Montgomery knew that better than anyone. He'd built his fortune on facts and figures, on logic and strategy. Miracles were for naive people who didn't understand how the world really worked. And yet, later that afternoon, as he finally drove home through the Los Angeles traffic, he found himself almost hoping. Maybe this Dorothy Williams would be different. Maybe she'd have some trick, some approach that the expensive experts had missed. By the time Richard pulled through the gates of his Bel Air mansion, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He parked his silver Bentley in the circular driveway and walked to the front door, his shoes clicking on the marble steps. The house was quiet, too quiet as always. Richard loosened his tie and walked through the grand foyer, past the expensive art on the walls that he barely noticed anymore, toward the living room. That's where Emma usually spent her afternoons, sitting on the couch with her iPad, playing games by herself. But as he reached the doorway, he heard something that stopped him cold. Humming. Someone was humming a soft, gentle melody. It was coming from the living room. Richard walked forward quietly and peeked around the corner. An elderly black woman sat on the couch next to Emma. She wore a simple blue dress and had her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her face was lined with wrinkles, but her eyes were bright and warm. This had to be Dorothy Williams. But it wasn't Dorothy that made Richard freeze in his tracks. It was Emma, his daughter, who usually sat stiff and separate from anyone who tried to get close to her, was leaning slightly toward the old woman. Not much, just a tiny bit. But for Emma, that was extraordinary. Dorothy was showing Emma something in a small book. Richard couldn't see what it was from where he stood. The old woman pointed to something on the page and said something too quiet for Richard to hear. Then she smiled at Emma. A smile so full of warmth and genuine affection that Richard felt something twist in his chest. Emma didn't smile back, but she didn't pull away either. She looked at the book, and then she looked at Dorothy's face, really looked at her, in a way she hadn't looked at anyone in years. Richard was about to step into the room when his phone buzzed loudly in his pocket. Both Dorothy and Emma looked toward the doorway. The moment was broken. "Mr. Montgomery," Dorothy said, standing up with a slight grunt of effort. "I was wondering when you'd get home." Richard walked into the room, pocketing his phone. "I'm sorry I'm late. I meant to be here earlier to meet you properly." Dorothy waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, don't worry about that. Emma and I have been getting to know each other just fine. Haven't we, sweetheart?" She looked down at Emma with such natural affection that Richard felt like an outsider in his own home. Emma looked at her father with her usual blank expression. No smile, no wave, no acknowledgement beyond a brief glance before she turned her attention back to the book in Dorothy's hand. It hurt the way it always hurt, but Richard had learned to live with that pain. "How was she today?" he asked. "Any problems?" He didn't want to say tantrums in front of Emma. She understood everything, even if she couldn't or wouldn't speak. Dorothy smiled. "Emma has been an absolute angel. We had lunch together, chicken nuggets and apple slices, and then we spent some time reading and looking at pictures. She's a very special little girl, Mr. Montgomery. Very special indeed." Richard felt tears prick his eyes unexpectedly. When was the last time someone had said something kind about Emma? Usually, the nannies complained or made excuses or looked at his daughter with pity or frustration. But Dorothy looked at Emma with pure love, as if she'd known her for years instead of hours. "I'm glad it went well," Richard managed to say. "I was worried because, well, the last few caregivers." "I'm not like the others," Dorothy said simply. "Those women were just looking for a paycheck. They didn't see Emma. They saw a problem to manage. But I see who she really is." "And who is she?" Richard asked, genuinely curious. Dorothy looked at Emma, still sitting on the couch, and her smile grew even warmer. "She's a little girl with a beautiful soul who's been hurt. She's scared, and she's angry, and she doesn't know how to let all those big feelings out. But she will, when she's ready, when she feels safe enough." Richard felt his throat tighten. "The doctors say she may never speak again." Dorothy met his eyes, and in that moment, Richard felt like she could see every fear, every regret, every sleepless night he'd suffered. "Doctors don't know everything, Mr. Montgomery. Sometimes miracles happen." Richard almost laughed. "I don't believe in miracles, Ms. Williams. I believe in facts and evidence." Dorothy's smile didn't fade. "That's okay. You don't have to believe in miracles for them to happen. They just do when the time is right." Before Richard could respond, Emma suddenly stood up from the couch. She looked agitated, her small fists clenched at her sides. Richard recognized the signs. A tantrum was coming. "Emma, sweetie," he started. But Emma wasn't having a tantrum. Instead, she grabbed the book from Dorothy's hand and thrust it toward Richard, her eyes intense. Richard took the book, confused. It was old, the cover worn and faded. "The Secret Garden" by Frances Hodgson Burnett. "That's my book," Dorothy explained. "I've had it since I was a girl." I was showing Emma the pictures and telling her the story. It's about a little girl who finds a hidden garden that's been locked up and forgotten. She brings it back to life with love and patience. Richard looked at the book, then at his daughter. Emma was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I think she wants you to read it to her," Dorothy said softly. "Maybe tonight before bed?" Richard nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Emma hadn't wanted him to read to her in over a year. She usually locked her bedroom door and wouldn't let him say goodnight. "I'll do that," he whispered. "Thank you." Dorothy gathered her purse and a light sweater. "I should be getting home. My bus comes in 20 minutes. "Bus?" Richard was shocked. "You took the bus here? From where?" "South Central. It's about an hour and a half, but it's no trouble." Richard felt ashamed. He'd been so desperate for help that he hadn't even thought about how this elderly woman would get to his mansion in Bel Air every day. "That's unacceptable. Tomorrow, I'll arrange for a car service to pick you up and bring you home." Or, an idea struck him. "Or you could stay here. We have a guest house that's fully furnished. You'd have your own space, and you wouldn't have to travel." Dorothy smiled gently and shook her head. "That's very generous, Mr. Montgomery. But I have my own life, my own home. The travel doesn't bother me. But a car service would be appreciated. I'll admit. These old bones aren't what they used to be." She walked over to Emma and knelt down with some difficulty, bringing herself to the little girl's eye level. "I'll see you tomorrow, sweetheart," Dorothy said, her voice warm as honey. "We'll read more about that secret garden. And maybe we'll talk about our own secrets too. Would you like that?" Emma didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. Dorothy reached out slowly and gently touched Emma's cheek. Richard expected his daughter to flinch or pull away, like she always did when people tried to touch her. But Emma didn't move. She let Dorothy's hand rest on her face for a long moment. Then Dorothy stood, said goodbye to Richard, and left. That night, Richard did something he hadn't done in months. He knocked on Emma's bedroom door at bedtime. "Emma? Can I come in?" Silence. But the door wasn't locked. Richard opened it slowly. Emma sat on her bed in her princess pajamas, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked at him with those big, dark eyes that used to sparkle with joy. "I brought the book," Richard said, holding up The Secret Garden. "Dorothy, Ms. Williams. She thought you might want me to read it to you." Emma didn't react, but she didn't shake her head or turn away either. Richard took that as permission. He sat down on the edge of her bed, opened the book, and began to read. He read about Mary Lennox, the spoiled, lonely little girl who lost her parents and went to live in a mysterious mansion on the English moors. He read about how Mary discovered a secret garden that had been locked up for 10 years, hidden behind walls and ivy, forgotten by everyone. As he read, Richard noticed Emma gradually relaxing. Her arms loosened from around her knees. She leaned back against her pillows. Her eyes stayed open, fixed on her father's face as he read. When he finished the 3rd chapter, Richard closed the book. "That's probably enough for tonight. Should I come back tomorrow to read more?" Emma stared at him for a long moment. Then, incredibly, she nodded. It was the first time she'd responded to anything Richard had said in 3 years. He felt tears streaming down his face before he even realized he was crying. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, sweetheart. I'll read more tomorrow." He wanted to hug her, to pull her into his arms and never let go. But he knew better. Physical touch still scared her. So instead, he just smiled at her through his tears, stood up, and walked to the door. "Good night, Emma. I love you." She didn't respond. But as he closed the door, he could have sworn he saw the tiniest flicker of something in her eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. The next 2 weeks were different. Not dramatically different, but Richard noticed small changes. Emma seemed calmer. She had fewer tantrums. She ate her meals more regularly. And every afternoon, when Richard came home from work, he would find Emma and Dorothy sitting together, reading or looking at pictures or sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. Dorothy had a peaceful presence that seemed to fill the enormous, empty mansion with something it had been missing. Warmth, maybe, or life. Richard wasn't sure what to call it, but he felt it. He also noticed Dorothy doing other things around the house. She would tidy up the living room while Emma played. She'd prepare simple meals in the kitchen, filling the house with smells Richard hadn't experienced since he was a child. Baked bread, vegetable soup, apple pie. "You don't have to do those things," Richard told her one evening. "You were hired to look after Emma, not to cook and clean." Dorothy just smiled. "I know, but I like to keep busy. And besides, this big house needs some life in it. It's too empty, Mr. Montgomery. Too quiet. Houses should have good smells and warm food and love in their walls." Richard didn't know what to say to that. He found himself coming home earlier and earlier from work. His executives were shocked. Richard Montgomery, who used to work 14-hour days, was now leaving the office at 5 o'clock. He told himself it was to spend time with Emma, to read her more chapters of The Secret Garden before bed. And that was true. But he also enjoyed talking with Dorothy. She had a way of seeing through his corporate armor to the frightened, grieving father underneath. She'd tell him stories about her own life. She'd raised 3 children as a single mother, working multiple jobs to keep them fed and clothed. All 3 had gone to college and had good lives now. "You did all that alone?" Richard asked one evening, amazed. Dorothy nodded. "Their father left when my youngest was just 2 years old. Said he couldn't handle the responsibility. So I did what needed doing. You do that when you love someone. You find a way." Richard thought about Sarah, who had left because she couldn't handle the pain. He thought about himself, who had buried himself in work because being home was too hard. "I haven't been finding a way," he admitted. "I've been hiding." Dorothy touched his hand gently. "But you're here now. That's what matters. It's never too late to start over." That night, as Richard read to Emma, something changed. They'd reached the part in the book where Mary finds the hidden door to the secret garden, buried under ivy, locked for 10 years. Richard was reading about Mary's excitement at discovering the door, at finding the key, at finally stepping into the forgotten garden. And then Emma made a sound. It was soft, barely there. A tiny intake of breath like a gasp. Richard's heart stopped. He looked up from the book. Emma was crying. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks, but her face wasn't twisted in pain. She looked, moved, touched by the story. "Emma," Richard whispered, "are you okay?" She looked at him, really looked at him, and nodded. She nodded. Richard set down the book with shaking hands. Do you like the story?" Another nod. "Do you want me to keep reading?" Emma hesitated. Then she shook her head. But she pointed at Richard, then at herself, then at the book. Richard didn't understand. "You want what, sweetie?" "I don't understand." Emma's face crumpled in frustration. She pointed again, more urgently. "Richard." "Emma." "The book. The garden. The locked door." And suddenly Richard understood. "You think we're like the story? You're like the locked garden? And I need to find the key." Emma's eyes widened. She nodded frantically. Richard felt like someone had punched him in the chest. His brilliant, beautiful daughter had been trying to communicate all along. She'd been locked inside herself, waiting for someone to find the key. He reached out slowly, giving Emma time to pull away if she wanted to. But she didn't. She let him take her hand. Her small hand in his felt like the most precious thing in the world. "I'm going to find the key, Emma," Richard promised, his voice breaking. "I don't know how, but I'm going to find it. We're going to bring your garden back to life. Okay?" Emma looked at their joined hands. Then she looked at her father's face, at the tears streaming down his cheeks, and she squeezed his hand back. Richard sobbed. He couldn't help it. It was the first voluntary touch Emma had given him in 3 years. The next morning, Richard woke up feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He got to the office early and immediately started rearranging his schedule. He canceled meetings, delegated projects, cleared his afternoons. His executives thought he'd lost his mind. But Richard didn't care. For 3 years, he'd been the richest man in California but the poorest father in the world. That was going to change. When he got home that afternoon, he found Dorothy and Emma in the back garden. The real garden behind the mansion, not the imaginary one in the book. The garden was professionally maintained by a landscaping service, but it was sterile, perfect, lifeless. Dorothy was showing Emma different flowers, telling her their names. "That's lavender," Dorothy was saying. "Smell it. Go on, it won't bite." Emma leaned forward and sniffed the purple flowers. Her eyes widened slightly. "Good smell, isn't it?" Dorothy laughed. "My grandmother used to grow lavender. She'd make sachets to put in our drawers, to make our clothes smell nice. Would you like to try growing something, Emma? Maybe in a pot, just for you." Emma looked uncertain. "We could start small," Dorothy encouraged. "Maybe some herbs. Basil is easy to grow. And mint, oh, mint grows like a weed. You can put it in lemonade and it tastes like summer." Richard walked over to join them. "That sounds like a great idea. We could set up a little herb garden just for Emma. What do you think, sweetheart?" Emma looked at her father, then at Dorothy, then back at the lavender. After a long moment, she nodded. It was another yes. Another small crack in the walls she'd built around herself. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful billionaire story. Over the next few days, Richard, Emma, and Dorothy went to a garden center and picked out pots and soil and small herb plants. Emma pointed to the ones she wanted: basil, mint, rosemary, and some flowers with bright yellow petals called marigolds. They set everything up on the back patio, where Emma could see it from her bedroom window. Dorothy showed Emma how to water the plants, how to feel the soil to see if it was too dry. "Plants are like people," Dorothy told Emma as they worked. "They need water and sun and love. You have to pay attention to them to notice what they need. And if you do that, they grow strong and beautiful." Emma listened intently, her small hands carefully patting soil around the marigold roots. Richard watched from a patio chair, ostensibly answering emails on his phone but actually just observing his daughter. She looked more present, more alive, than she had in years. That evening, after reading more of The Secret Garden, Richard asked Emma a question that had been on his mind. "Emma, do you think Dorothy is like Dickon from the book?" Dickon was a character they just met in the story. A boy who had a special way with animals and plants, who seemed to understand growing things instinctively. Emma thought about it, then nodded. "Yeah," Richard agreed. "I think so too. She has a gift, doesn't she? A way of making things grow." Emma nodded again, but then she did something new. She pointed at her father, then at herself, then made a growing motion with her hands, like a plant sprouting up. "You think I'm helping you grow too?" Richard asked, his heart swelling. Emma nodded firmly. "Oh, sweetheart." Richard's voice cracked. "You've got it backwards. You're the one helping me grow. Before you, I was just a machine. Work, money, deals, more work. I forgot how to be a person. But watching you fight your way back, you're teaching me what really matters." Emma listened, her eyes never leaving her father's face. Then she pointed at the book. "You want me to keep reading?" She nodded. So Richard read about Mary and Dickon working in the secret garden, bringing it back to life. He read about the magic of watching things grow, of tending to something with love and patience. As he read, he felt Emma gradually lean closer until she was resting against his side. It was the closest they'd been in 3 years. Richard kept reading, afraid that if he acknowledged what was happening, it would end. So he just let it be, his daughter warm against his side, the gentle weight of her trust more valuable than all his billions. After he finished the chapter and closed the book, Emma was almost asleep. Richard carefully shifted her onto her pillow and pulled the blanket up to her chin. "Good night, Emma," he whispered. "I love you so much." He was almost to the door when he heard it. So quiet he almost thought he'd imagined it. A whisper, barely there, but definitely real. "Love you." Richard froze. His hand was on the doorknob. He didn't turn around, didn't move, afraid he'd misheard. But then Emma said it again, a little louder. "Love you too, Daddy." Richard's legs gave out. He actually fell to his knees right there in the doorway. Sobs shook his whole body. Emma had spoken. After 3 years of silence, his daughter had spoken. He turned around, tears streaming down his face. Emma was sitting up in bed, looking scared, like she'd done something wrong. "Emma," Richard managed to say between sobs. "Say it again, please." "I love you, Daddy," Emma whispered, her own tears starting now. "I love you so much." Richard stumbled to the bed and pulled his daughter into his arms. She didn't resist. She wrapped her thin arms around his neck and cried into his shoulder. "I love you too, baby," Richard said over and over. "I love you so much. I've missed your voice. I've missed you." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, crying years of pain out together. When they finally pulled apart, Emma's face was blotchy and her nose was running, but she looked lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. "Can you tell me what happened?" Richard asked gently. "In the car? What made you stop talking?" Emma's face clouded. She shook her head quickly. "Okay," Richard said immediately. "That's okay. You don't have to tell me now. Maybe someday when you're ready, or maybe never. That's up to you." Emma looked relieved. Then she said, in that soft, rusty voice, "Dorothy says it's okay to be scared." "Dorothy is very wise," Richard said, smiling through his tears. "What else does Dorothy say?" "She says the garden grows when it's ready. You can't force it. You just have to give it love and water and sun. And wait. She says I'm like a garden too." Richard felt more tears coming. "She's right. You are like a garden, sweetheart. A beautiful garden that's been waiting for the right time to bloom." Emma nodded seriously. Then she said, "Daddy." "Yes, baby? I'm tired now. Can you stay until I fall asleep?" "I'll stay as long as you want," Richard promised. He lay down on top of the covers next to Emma. She snuggled against his side, her head on his chest, just like she used to do when she was small. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing soft and even. Richard stayed awake long after Emma drifted off. He stared at the ceiling of her bedroom, listening to his daughter breathe, feeling her warmth against his side. A miracle. That's what Dorothy had said would happen. And she'd been right. But the miracle wasn't just Emma speaking. The miracle was everything. Dorothy appearing exactly when they needed her. The book about the secret garden. The herbs they planted together. The slow healing happening in this broken family. Richard had spent his whole life believing only in things he could see, measure, and control. But lying there in his daughter's bed, listening to her peaceful breathing, he finally understood that some things couldn't be measured. Love couldn't be measured. Hope couldn't be measured. And miracles, well, miracles happened whether you believed in them or not. The next morning, Richard woke up still in Emma's bed. She was awake, watching him with a small smile. "Good morning," Richard said, his voice rough from sleep. "Morning, Daddy," Emma whispered. Hearing her voice still felt like a dream. Richard was afraid if he moved too fast or said the wrong thing, it would all disappear. They went downstairs together, Emma's hand in his. Dorothy was already in the kitchen making pancakes. The smell filled the whole house. "Good morning," Dorothy called out cheerfully. Then she looked at their joined hands and smiled even wider. My, someone looks happy today." "Dorothy," Richard said. "Emma spoke last night. She said, 'I love you.'" Dorothy set down her spatula and walked over to them. She cupped Emma's face in her hands, looking at her with such love it made Richard's chest ache. "Did you now?" Dorothy said softly. "Did you find your voice, sweetheart?" Emma nodded. Then, in that quiet whisper, she said, "Hi, Dorothy." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, child. Hi yourself. I've been waiting to hear that sweet voice." She pulled Emma into a hug, and Emma hugged her back without hesitation. Richard watched them, feeling grateful beyond words. This woman, who he'd hired in desperation just 2 weeks ago, had done more for his family than all his money could have bought. They ate breakfast together, the three of them. Emma didn't talk much, but she answered questions when asked. Yes, she wanted orange juice. Yes, the pancakes were good. Yes, she wanted to water her herbs after breakfast. It felt like a normal family breakfast, something Richard hadn't experienced in years. After breakfast, while Emma was checking her herb garden, Richard pulled Dorothy aside. I don't know how to thank you, he said. What you've done for Emma, for both of us. I can't even put it into words. Dorothy shook her head. I didn't do anything special, Mr. Montgomery. I just loved her. That's all any child needs, really. Love and patience and someone who sees them for who they really are. But you knew she would speak. You said a miracle would happen. Dorothy smiled mysteriously. I hoped it would, but I didn't know for certain. Some things you just have to have faith in. You have a gift, Richard said. Whatever you're being paid, it's not enough. Name your price. Anything. Dorothy laughed, a rich warm sound. Oh, Mr. Montgomery, I don't want more money. I have enough for my little apartment and my simple life. That's all I need. But you should have more. You deserve. What I deserve, Dorothy interrupted gently, is to do work that matters, to help children who are hurting, to bring a little light into dark places. That's worth more than any amount of money. Richard nodded, humbled. Here was a woman who truly understood what mattered in life, while he was still learning. That afternoon, Richard did something he'd never done before. He took the day off work. Completely off. No emails, no phone calls, no thinking about deals or meetings. Instead, he spent the day with Emma and Dorothy. They worked in the garden together. They read more of The Secret Garden. They made lunch together, simple sandwiches that tasted better than any restaurant meal Richard had ever eaten. Emma talked more as the day went on, her voice getting slightly stronger. She still spoke quietly, and not a lot, but every word felt like a gift. That evening, as Dorothy was getting ready to leave, Emma ran up to her and hugged her tight. Thank you, Emma whispered into Dorothy's dress. Oh, baby, Dorothy said, hugging her back. You don't have to thank me. You did all the hard work. You found your voice all by yourself. I just helped you remember where you'd left it. After Dorothy left, Richard and Emma had dinner together, just the two of them. Emma ate her spaghetti and told Richard about the different herbs she'd planted, how the mint was already getting bigger. It was the most normal, beautiful evening Richard could remember. Later, as he tucked Emma into bed, she looked at him seriously. Daddy. Yes, sweetheart. Why did Dorothy come to us? Richard thought about that. I think she came because we needed her. Because sometimes, when things are darkest, the right person appears to help us find the light again. Emma considered that. Like Dickon in the book? Exactly like Dickon. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Daddy, I have a secret, like the secret garden. Richard felt his heart rate pick up. Do you want to tell me your secret? Emma shook her head. Not yet, but Dorothy said I should tell you someday. When I'm ready. That's okay, baby. Whenever you're ready, I'll listen. And if you're never ready, that's okay too. Emma smiled. I think I'll be ready soon. Dorothy says secrets are lighter when you share them. Dorothy is very wise, Richard agreed. He read Emma another chapter, kissed her goodnight, and left her room feeling more at peace than he had in years. But that night, something felt different. As Richard lay in his own bed, unable to sleep, he felt a strange sense of foreboding, like something was about to change, like they were approaching an edge of something important. He told himself he was being paranoid. Emma was speaking again. They were healing. Everything was getting better. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Around 2 a.m, Richard finally fell into a restless sleep. He dreamed of gardens, of locked doors, of keys that wouldn't turn. He woke with a start at 6:47 a.m. to the sound of screaming. Emma's screaming. Richard bolted from his bed and ran down the hall. He burst into Emma's room to find his daughter sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, screaming over and over. The car is coming. Mommy, watch out. She was having a nightmare, or a flashback, reliving the accident. Richard rushed to her and pulled her into his arms. Emma, it's okay. You're safe. There's no car. It was just a dream. But Emma kept screaming, her eyes wide and unseeing. The car is going to hit us. Mommy. Richard held her tight, rocking her, talking to her, but she couldn't hear him. She was trapped in the memory, in that terrible moment 3 years ago. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, Emma's screams faded to sobs. She collapsed against Richard's chest, shaking and crying. "It's okay," Richard kept saying. "You're safe. I've got you. You're safe." When Emma finally calmed down enough to speak, she looked up at Richard with devastated eyes. "I saw it, Daddy," she whispered. "In the car. I saw the other car coming, and I tried to tell Mommy, but I couldn't make words come out fast enough. I tried to warn her, but I couldn't, and then we crashed, and it was my fault. If I'd been able to say it faster, if I'd been able to scream, maybe Mommy could have moved. Maybe—" "Stop," Richard said firmly, holding Emma's face in his hands so she had to look at him. "Stop, Emma. It was not your fault. Do you hear me? You were 5 years old. You didn't cause that accident. The drunk driver caused it. Not you. Never you." Emma shook her head violently. "But I should have warned her. I saw it coming, and I froze and—" "You were a little girl in a terrifying situation. Your brain froze because you were scared. That's normal. That's what brains do sometimes when they're scared. But that doesn't make it your fault." Emma cried harder. "I stopped talking because I didn't want to mess up again. If I don't talk, I can't say the wrong thing or freeze up when someone needs me to say something important." Richard felt like his heart was being ripped out of his chest. For 3 years, his daughter had been punishing herself, living in silence because she believed she'd failed. "Oh, Emma," he whispered, pulling her close again. "Oh, baby, you didn't fail. You survived. That's what matters." They stayed like that for a long time, Emma crying out 3 years of guilt and fear, Richard holding her and telling her over and over that she was not to blame. When Emma finally cried herself out, she was exhausted. Richard laid her back down and pulled the covers up. "Try to sleep, sweetheart. I'll stay right here." Emma grabbed his hand. "Don't leave. I won't. I promise." Richard sat on the edge of her bed, holding her hand, until she fell into a restless sleep. As dawn light started filtering through the curtains, Richard realized something. Emma speaking again had opened a door. But behind that door wasn't just joy and healing. Behind that door were all the traumatic memories she'd been locked away with, all the pain and guilt she'd been carrying alone. Speaking was just the beginning. The real work of healing was just starting. And Richard had no idea if he was strong enough to help his daughter through it. When Dorothy arrived at 9 that morning, she took one look at Richard's face and knew something had happened. "Tell me," she said simply. Richard explained about Emma's nightmare, about the guilt she'd been carrying, about her belief that the accident was her fault. Dorothy listened quietly, her face grave. When Richard finished, she was silent for a long moment. "Where is Emma now?" she finally asked. "Still sleeping. She was up most of the night." Dorothy nodded. "That poor baby, carrying all that guilt by herself for 3 years. No wonder she stopped talking." "I don't know how to help her," Richard admitted. "How do I make her understand it wasn't her fault?" Dorothy looked at him with kind eyes. "You can't make her understand, Mr. Montgomery. You can only love her and remind her, over and over, until someday she believes it. Healing from trauma isn't quick. It's slow and hard, and sometimes you take steps backward before you move forward." "But she was doing so well," Richard said, frustrated. "She was speaking. She was happy. She was beginning to heal," Dorothy corrected. "But healing means dealing with the wound, not pretending it isn't there. Emma is finally strong enough to face what happened. That's actually progress, even though it doesn't feel like it." Richard slumped in his chair. "I feel so helpless. I can solve any business problem. I can make deals worth billions. But I can't fix this. I can't fix my own daughter." Dorothy sat down next to him and patted his hand. "You're not supposed to fix her, Mr. Montgomery. She's not broken. She's wounded and she's healing, and your job is just to be there while she does. To love her. To remind her she's safe. That's all any of us can do for the people we love." Richard nodded, but he still felt lost. Around noon, Emma finally woke up. She came downstairs slowly, her eyes red and puffy from crying. Dorothy was in the kitchen making vegetable soup. She turned when she heard Emma and opened her arms. Emma ran to her and buried her face in Dorothy's shoulder. "I know, baby," Dorothy murmured, stroking Emma's hair. "I know it's hard, but you're so brave. You told your daddy the truth, didn't you? You told him your secret." Emma nodded against Dorothy's shoulder. "That took so much courage," Dorothy said. "I'm so proud of you." Emma pulled back and looked at Dorothy with desperate eyes. "But it was my fault. I should have." "Stop right there," Dorothy said firmly. "Emma, look at me. Really look at me." Emma met Dorothy's eyes. "What happened in that car was not your fault. Do you understand? You were a baby, a tiny little girl, and your brain did exactly what it was supposed to do in a dangerous situation. It froze to keep you safe. That's nature, sweetheart. That's how our bodies protect us." "But—" "No buts," Dorothy said. "If a 5-year-old could prevent car accidents just by talking fast enough, there would never be any car accidents. Adults with fully grown brains can't react fast enough to stop a crash that happens in a split second. How could a little girl?" Emma looked uncertain. "Your mommy doesn't blame you," Dorothy continued. "Your daddy doesn't blame you. The only person blaming you is you. And baby, you need to stop. You need to forgive yourself for being human." Emma's face crumpled. "I don't know how." "I know," Dorothy said gently. "That's okay. Forgiveness takes time. But we're going to work on it together. Okay? One day at a time." Emma nodded slowly. "Now," Dorothy said, her tone becoming lighter, "I made soup. The vegetables we used came from the farmer's market this morning, and I need someone to tell me if I got the seasoning right. Think you can help with that?" Emma managed a small smile. "Okay." They had lunch together, the three of them. Emma was quiet but present. She ate her soup and listened as Dorothy told a story about her grandson's new puppy that kept eating his homework. It was such a normal moment, so ordinary, but Richard treasured it. Normal was something his family hadn't had in a long time. After lunch, Dorothy suggested they work in the garden. Emma's herbs needed watering, and there were some weeds to pull. As they worked, Dorothy talked about gardening, about plants, about nothing in particular. Her voice was soothing, constant, like a gentle stream. Richard watched Emma gradually relax. The tension in her small shoulders eased. Her movements became less jerky, more fluid. This was Dorothy's gift, Richard realized. She didn't try to fix people or force healing. She just created a safe space where healing could happen naturally, like a plant growing toward the sun. That evening, Emma asked Richard to read to her again. They were near the end of The Secret Garden now, the part where the garden is fully alive again, full of roses and growth and beauty. As Richard read, Emma interrupted him. "Daddy." "Yes. Do you think I can be like the garden? All alive again?" Richard closed the book and looked at his daughter. "Emma, you already are alive. You've always been alive. But yes, I think you're going to bloom even more. I think you're going to be happier than you've ever been. Even with the bad memories?" "The bad memories don't go away," Richard said honestly. "But they get smaller. They hurt less. And the good memories, the happy ones we're making right now, those get bigger and brighter, and eventually they shine so bright that the bad ones can't hurt you as much." Emma thought about that. Dorothy says memories are like stars. The bad ones are there, but if you look at the good ones instead, they're brighter. "Dorothy's right," Richard agreed. Emma snuggled closer to him. "Read more, Daddy." So Richard read about Colin, the sick boy in the story, who everyone thought would die but who got stronger and healthier from spending time in the garden. He read about magic, not the magic of spells and wands, but the magic of nature and love and believing in good things. When he finished the chapter, Emma was almost asleep. "Daddy?" she murmured drowsily. I'm glad Dorothy came to us." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." After Emma fell asleep, Richard went downstairs. Dorothy was just putting on her sweater, getting ready to leave. "Dorothy," Richard said, "I need to ask you something." "Of course." "How did you know? How did you know Emma would speak? That she could be reached?" Dorothy smiled. "I didn't know for certain. But I believed. I've seen a lot of wounded children in my life, Mr. Montgomery. I raised 3 of my own, and each one had their own pains and struggles. I've worked with dozens more through the years, and I've learned that children are stronger than we think. They want to heal. They want to come back to life. Sometimes they just need someone to believe in them. But it's more than that, Richard insisted. You have something special. A gift. Dorothy shook her head. The only gift I have is love, Mr. Montgomery. And that's a gift anyone can give if they choose to. You have it too. You're giving it to Emma every day now. She paused at the door, then turned back. Can I tell you something? About Emma's healing? Please. It's going to be hard. Last night was just the beginning. She's going to have more nightmares, more bad days. She might even stop talking again for a little while. Healing isn't a straight line. It zigzags all over the place. Richard felt fear grip his heart. But she will heal, right? Eventually? Yes, Dorothy said firmly. She will. But you need to be patient. And you need to take care of yourself too, because you can't help her if you're falling apart. Richard nodded. I will. I promise. After Dorothy left, Richard poured himself a glass of scotch and sat in his study, thinking. 3 weeks ago, his life had been a disaster. His daughter was silent. His house was empty. His heart was broken. Now Emma was speaking. They were reading together. They were healing. But Dorothy was right. The hardest part might still be ahead. Richard thought about calling Sarah, Emma's mother. She should know that Emma was speaking again. But what would he say? Our daughter finally spoke. Where were you? No, that wasn't fair. Sarah had her own trauma to deal with, her own healing. Maybe someday they'd talk. Maybe someday Emma would be ready to see her mother again. But not yet. For now it was just Richard, Emma, and Dorothy, their own little broken family, putting themselves back together piece by piece. Richard finished his drink and headed upstairs to check on Emma one more time before bed. She was sleeping peacefully, her face relaxed, one hand curled under her cheek. Richard stood in the doorway watching her, filled with a love so intense it almost hurt. He would do anything for this child, anything to keep her safe, to help her heal. And for the first time in 3 years, he actually believed that might be possible. The next few days were better. Emma had no more nightmares. She talked more, though still quietly. She spent her afternoons with Dorothy, working in the garden, reading, cooking simple meals. Richard came home early every day. He and Emma finished The Secret Garden together, and Emma cried at the happy ending. See, Richard said, hugging her. Gardens can come back to life, and so can little girls. Emma smiled against his chest. It was a real smile, not the sad, haunted expression she'd worn for 3 years. On Saturday, Richard suggested they all go to the botanical gardens downtown. Emma had never been there, and he thought she might enjoy seeing the big greenhouses full of exotic plants. Dorothy thought it was a wonderful idea. Fresh air and beautiful things. That's good medicine for anyone. So Saturday morning, they drove to the botanical gardens. Emma sat in the back seat, looking out the window, commenting on things she saw. A dog, a red car, a man with a funny hat. Every word felt like a miracle. The botanical gardens were spectacular. Huge glass greenhouses filled with plants from all over the world. Desert plants with crazy shapes. Tropical plants with enormous leaves. A whole room full of orchids in every color imaginable. Emma's eyes were wide with wonder. She pointed at things, asked questions, touched leaves gently when Dorothy said it was okay. They spent hours there, wandering through the different sections, reading the plaques about different plants, taking their time. Richard took a photo of Emma and Dorothy standing under a huge palm tree. Dorothy's arm was around Emma's shoulders, and Emma was actually smiling. A full, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. It was the first photo Richard had taken of Emma smiling in 3 years. He stared at it on his phone, hardly believing it was real. As they walked through the rose garden, Emma suddenly stopped. "Daddy, look!" She was pointing at a section labeled, The Secret Garden Collection. Richard read the sign. It explained that these were varieties of roses mentioned in Frances Hodgson Burnett's novel, the secret garden. Emma was delighted. She ran from rows to rows, reading the names, smelling the flowers, her whole face glowing with joy. Dorothy caught Richard's eye and smiled. "Magic," she mouthed. "Magic," Richard agreed. They had lunch at the garden's cafe, sandwiches and lemonade with mint from Emma's garden that they'd brought from home. Emma chattered about the plants she'd seen, about which ones she'd like to grow someday, about how the orchids looked like butterflies. It was the most Richard had heard her talk since the accident. Her voice was getting stronger, more confident. After lunch, they visited the children's garden section, where kids could dig in special dirt plots and plant seeds. Emma planted sunflower seeds, pressing them into the soil gently, just like Dorothy had taught her. "They'll be giant by summer," the garden volunteer told Emma. "Taller than you, probably." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? Really? You'll have to come back and see them." Emma looked at Richard. "Can we, Daddy? Can we come back?" "We can come back any time you want," Richard promised. On the drive home, Emma fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the exciting day. Dorothy looked at Richard. "She did wonderfully today, didn't she?" "She was incredible," Richard agreed. "It's like having my real daughter back. The Emma I remember." "She was always your real daughter," Dorothy said gently. "She was just hidden for a while, but she's coming back now, little by little." When they got home, Richard carried sleeping Emma up to her room and tucked her into bed, clothes and all. She barely stirred. Downstairs, Dorothy made tea, and she and Richard sat in the kitchen talking. "Dorothy," Richard said, "I've been thinking, when Emma is fully healed, when she's really okay again, are you going to leave? Move on to another family that needs help?" Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "Do you want me to leave, Mr. Montgomery?" "No," Richard said quickly. "No, that's the opposite of what I want. I realized that one day Emma won't need as much help. She'll be back in school, making friends, living a normal life, and I wondered if you'd stay anyway, be part of our family." Dorothy's eyes glistened. "Mr. Montgomery." "Richard. Please call me Richard." "Richard," Dorothy said with a warm smile. "I'd be honored to stay, for as long as you'll have me. Emma has found a place in my heart, and so have you. You're not just a job to me, you're family." Richard felt tears in his eyes. "We're family? Of course we are," Dorothy said. "Family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up for each other, who love each other even when it's hard. We're family." Richard reached across the table and took Dorothy's hand. "Thank you for everything, for saving us." "Oh, honey," Dorothy said, squeezing his hand. "You saved yourselves. I just helped you remember how." That night, Richard went to bed feeling happier than he had in years. Emma was healing. They were a family again, a new kind of family but a real one. But at 3 a.m., he woke to the sound of Emma screaming again. Another nightmare. Richard ran to her room, but this time Dorothy was already there. She must have heard Emma from the guest room where Richard had finally convinced her to stay instead of making the long trip home. Dorothy was sitting on Emma's bed, holding her, rocking her gently. "Shoo, baby," Dorothy was murmuring. "It's okay. You're safe. It was just a dream." Emma was sobbing, clinging to Dorothy. "The car. I saw it again." "I know," Dorothy soothed. "I know it's scary, but it's over now. You're safe in your bed, in your home, with people who love you." Richard stood in the doorway, feeling helpless. Dorothy looked up and saw him. "Come here," she said. Richard came and sat on the other side of Emma. Together, he and Dorothy surrounded her with warmth and safety. "We've got you," Richard said. "Both of us. We've got you, sweetheart." Slowly, Emma's sobs quieted. Her breathing evened out, but she didn't let go of Dorothy. "Can Dorothy stay?" Emma whispered. "In my room? Just tonight?" Dorothy looked at Richard, asking permission. "Of course," Richard said. "Whatever you need, Emma." So Dorothy stayed, lying on top of the covers next to Emma. And Richard stayed too, sitting in the rocking chair by the bed. They stayed like that until morning, A strange little vigil, 3 people who'd found each other by chance, or maybe by something more than chance, and who were now bound together by love and healing and hope. As the sun rose, Emma finally fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. Dorothy carefully got up and gestured for Richard to follow her out. In the hallway, she said quietly, "The nightmares might continue for a while. Trauma has a way of coming back when we start to feel safe enough to process it." "I understand," Richard said. "We'll get through it. Together." Dorothy smiled. Yes, together. But neither of them knew that the real test was coming. That everything they'd worked toward was about to be challenged in a way none of them expected. Because that afternoon, when Richard came home from a quick trip to the office, he found Emma and Dorothy in the living room. And Emma was doing something she hadn't done in 3 years. She was laughing. Really, truly laughing, her head thrown back, her whole body shaking with giggles. Dorothy had been telling her a funny story about one of her grandchildren putting a frog in his sister's lunchbox, and Emma found it hilarious. The sound of his daughter's laughter hit Richard like a wave. He stood in the doorway, transfixed. Dorothy saw him and winked. She kept telling the story, and Emma kept laughing, and Richard felt like his heart might actually burst from joy. When Emma finally calmed down, she wiped tears from her eyes. Happy tears this time, and saw her father. "Daddy, Dorothy is so funny. Did you know one time her grandson put a whoopee cushion on his teacher's chair and—" Emma chattered on, telling him the story, her voice bright and animated and alive. This was his daughter. This was the Emma he'd thought was lost forever. But then Emma stopped mid-sentence. Her face changed. The smile disappeared. "Emma," Richard said, concerned. "What's wrong?" Emma was staring past him, toward the front door. Her face had gone completely white. Richard turned to see what she was looking at. And there, standing in the doorway, was Sarah, Emma's mother, Richard's ex-wife. She looked older than Richard remembered. Thinner. There were new lines on her face, dark circles under her eyes. "Hello, Richard," Sarah said quietly. "I hope you don't mind. I used my old key." Richard was too shocked to respond. Sarah's eyes moved to Emma. "Hi, baby girl. I've missed you so much." Emma made a sound, a small, frightened whimper. Then she turned and ran. Up the stairs, down the hall. Her bedroom door slammed. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Sarah flinched at the sound of the door slamming. Her face crumpled, and tears started streaming down her cheeks. I shouldn't have come. I'm sorry. I heard from Margaret that Emma was doing better, and I thought maybe—" Richard found his voice. "You thought what, Sarah? That you could just walk back in after 2 years? Without warning? Without even calling first?" "I know," Sarah whispered. "I know it was wrong. But I was afraid if I called, you'd tell me not to come. And I needed to see her, Richard. I needed to see my daughter." Dorothy had been sitting quietly, but now she stood. "I think I should go check on Emma." "No," Richard said quickly. "Please stay. Emma needs you." Dorothy nodded and headed upstairs. Richard and Sarah stood facing each other in the foyer, years of pain and anger and regret hanging in the air between them. "She spoke," Sarah said softly. "Margaret told me. After 3 years, Emma finally spoke." "Yes," Richard said coldly. "She did. No thanks to you." Sarah absorbed the blow. "That's fair. I deserve that. I deserve all of it. I abandoned you both when you needed me most. Why did you come, Sarah?" "Really?" Sarah wiped her eyes. "Because I've been in therapy. Real therapy, not just the grief counseling. And I finally worked through why I ran. I was drowning in guilt, Richard. Every time I looked at Emma, I saw the accident. I heard the crash. I felt like I'd broken our daughter, and I couldn't face it. So you left me to face it alone." "Yes, and that was unforgivable. I know that, but I'm trying to be better now. I'm trying to make amends. I want to be Emma's mother again, if she'll let me." Richard felt his anger warring with old love, old memories. This was the woman he'd once promised to spend his life with. The woman who'd given him Emma. But she was also the woman who'd walked away when everything fell apart. "It's not up to me," Richard said finally. It's up to Emma. And right now, she's terrified of you. Sarah nodded, crying harder. I understand. I'll go. But Richard, can you tell her something for me? Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm getting help, and maybe someday, if she wants, I'd like to see her again. On her terms. When she's ready. Before Richard could respond, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Dorothy was coming down, and she was holding Emma's hand. Emma's face was blotchy from crying, but she walked down the stairs steadily, one step at a time. When she reached the bottom, she looked at her mother. Sarah knelt down, making herself smaller. Emma, baby, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stay. I'm sorry for everything. Emma stared at her mother for a long moment. Then she said, in that quiet voice that was still growing stronger, You left me. I know, Sarah sobbed. I'm so sorry. You left when I needed you. When Daddy needed you. I know, baby. I know. Emma's grip on Dorothy's hand tightened. Then she said, But Dorothy says everyone makes mistakes. She says what matters is if we try to do better. Sarah looked at Dorothy with something like gratitude. Dorothy is very wise. Emma nodded. Are you going to leave again? No, Sarah said quickly. I mean, I live in Boston now, but I'm not going to disappear. If you want me to visit or call or write letters, I will. Whatever you want, Emma. It's all up to you. Emma thought about this. Then she said something that broke everyone's hearts and healed them at the same time. I'm not ready yet for you to be my mommy again. But maybe someday we could try. Maybe we could be friends first. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, crying so hard her whole body shook. Yes, baby. Whatever you want. Thank you. Thank you so much. Emma let go of Dorothy's hand and took one small step toward her mother. Then another, until she was standing right in front of Sarah. She reached out and touched her mother's face, wiping away a tear. Don't cry, Emma said softly. Dorothy says gardens can grow again, even after winter. Maybe people can too. Sarah let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. You're so wise, baby girl. When did you get so wise? Emma looked back at Dorothy. Dorothy taught me, and Daddy, and the secret garden book. Richard felt tears running down his own face now. His daughter, his beautiful, brave, broken and healing daughter, was offering forgiveness to someone who didn't deserve it yet. Because that's what love did. It gave people chances to grow. Sarah stood up slowly. She looked at Richard. I should go. But Richard, thank you for taking care of her. For not giving up on her when I did. Richard nodded, not trusting his voice. Sarah looked at Dorothy. And thank you, whoever you are. Thank you for helping my daughter find her voice. Dorothy smiled. I'm just the gardener, dear. Emma did all the growing herself. Sarah walked to the door, then paused. She looked back at Emma. Can I call you? Maybe once a week? We could talk on the phone. Emma considered this. Then she nodded. Okay, once a week. Sarah smiled through her tears. Okay, I'll call Saturday mornings. Is that good? That's good. And then Sarah left, closing the door gently behind her. The house was quiet for a long moment. Then Emma turned to Richard. Are you mad at me, Daddy? For telling Mommy she could call? Richard knelt down and pulled his daughter into a fierce hug. No, sweetheart. I'm not mad. I'm proud of you. So incredibly proud. Emma hugged him back. Dorothy said forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves. So we don't have to carry heavy things anymore. Richard looked at Dorothy over Emma's head. Dorothy was smiling, her eyes shining with tears. Dorothy's right, Richard said. As always. That evening they had dinner together, Richard, Emma, and Dorothy. They made spaghetti and garlic bread, and Emma actually set the table without being asked. As they ate, Emma said, I'm tired of nightmares. I know, baby, Richard said. But Dorothy says they'll get smaller. She says I just have to keep being brave. You're the bravest person I know, Richard told her. Emma smiled. You're brave too, Daddy. You didn't run away like Mommy did. You stayed. Richard's throat tightened. Of course I stayed. You're my whole world, Emma. After dinner, they all went out to check on Emma's herb garden. The plants were thriving, growing bigger every day. The mint had gotten so big they'd had to trim it back. Look how much they've grown, Emma said, touching the basil leaves gently. Just from water and sun and love. Just like you, Dorothy said, putting her arm around Emma's shoulders. Emma leaned into Dorothy's side. I'm glad you came to us, Dorothy. I don't know what we would have done without you. You would have been just fine, Dorothy said. But I'm glad I came too. You two have brought so much joy into my life. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the three of them stood in the garden together. A billionaire who'd learned that money couldn't buy the things that mattered most. A little girl who'd been broken and was learning to bloom again. And an elderly woman who'd shown them both that miracles were real. You just had to believe in them. Richard looked at Emma, laughing at something Dorothy was saying, her face bright and alive, and he finally understood. The miracle wasn't that Emma had started speaking again. The miracle was love. The miracle was healing. The miracle was second chances and new beginnings. The miracle was that even when everything seemed lost, even in the darkest moments, hope could find a way to grow, like a garden locked away for years, waiting patiently for someone to turn the key and let the light back in. That night, as Richard tucked Emma into bed, she said, "Daddy, I think my garden is growing back. My real garden, the one inside me. I think so too, sweetheart. And I think Mommy's garden will grow back too. Maybe it will just take longer. Some plants are slower than others." "That's very understanding of you." Emma smiled sleepily. "Dorothy says everyone deserves a chance to bloom, even the weeds." Richard laughed softly. "Dorothy is a very wise woman." "The wisest," Emma agreed. "Read to me, Daddy." They'd finished The Secret Garden, but they'd started a new book, Anne of Green Gables, about another girl who faced challenges but never lost hope. As Richard read, Emma's eyes grew heavy. Before she fell asleep, she whispered, "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Emma. More than all the stars in the sky. More than all the flowers in the world. More than all the flowers in the whole universe." Emma smiled and closed her eyes. Richard sat there for a while after she fell asleep, watching her peaceful face, listening to her gentle breathing. He thought about the journey they'd been on. 3 years of darkness, of silence, of pain. And then Dorothy had appeared, like an answer to a prayer Richard hadn't even known how to pray. She'd said she didn't have any special gifts, that she'd only offered love. But Richard knew better. Dorothy had the gift of seeing people as they truly were, not as their trauma or their wealth or their mistakes, but as human beings who deserved kindness and hope and second chances. She'd seen Emma not as a broken child, but as a garden waiting to bloom. She'd seen Richard not as a cold billionaire, but as a frightened father who'd forgotten how to hope. And in seeing them that way, she'd helped them see themselves that way too. Richard went downstairs and found Dorothy in the kitchen, making tea. "Join me?" she asked. They sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea in comfortable silence. "Dorothy," Richard finally said, "I didn't believe in miracles before you came. I thought they were fairy tales for naive people. And now," Dorothy asked with a knowing smile, "now I think miracles happen every day. They're just quieter than we expect. Gentler. There in the small moments. A daughter's laugh, a hand reaching out, a garden growing." Dorothy nodded. "That's exactly right. Miracles aren't always big dramatic moments. Sometimes they're just love showing up when you need it most. You showed up when we needed you most. And you let me in," Dorothy said. "That took courage too, Richard. Letting someone help you, trusting again after everything you'd been through. That's not easy." They sat together in the warm kitchen, two people who'd become family through the most unlikely circumstances. "What happens now?" Richard asked. "Emma's speaking again. She's healing. Does the story just end?" Dorothy laughed. "Oh, honey, this isn't the end of the story. This is just the beginning. Emma still has a long road ahead. More healing, more growing, learning to trust herself again. And you do too. Learning to balance work and family, learning to forgive yourself for the time you lost, learning to believe in good things again. And you'll be here to help us through it. For as long as you need me, Dorothy promised. And even after you don't need me anymore, I'll still be here, because that's what family does. They show up, they stay. Richard felt tears in his eyes again. He seemed to cry more now than he ever had in his life. But they were good tears, healing tears. Thank you, he whispered, for everything, for believing in us, for teaching us how to hope again. Dorothy reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You're welcome, dear. But don't forget you did this. You and Emma. You chose to heal. You chose love over fear. I just helped you remember that choice was there. As they finished their tea, Richard looked around the kitchen. At the drawings Emma had made that were stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. At the herbs from the garden drying by the window. At the photo he'd taken at the botanical gardens showing Emma's huge smile. This was home. Not because of the expensive furniture or the marble counters or the impressive architecture, but because it was filled with love now, with laughter and hope and second chances. The billionaire who didn't believe in miracles had learned the most important lesson of all, that the greatest miracles couldn't be bought or manufactured. They grew naturally, like gardens, when you gave them love and patience and time. And sometimes, just sometimes, they came in the form of an elderly woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice, who saw past the money and the trauma and the silence to the healing that was waiting underneath. Dorothy had told them that miracles happen when the time is right. And she'd been absolutely right. The miracle wasn't instant. It was gradual, tender, real. It was in every word Emma spoke, getting stronger day by day. It was in every nightmare that got a little shorter, a little less scary. It was in Richard coming home early to read bedtime stories. It was in Sarah taking the first steps toward redemption. It was in a garden of herbs growing on a sunny patio. The miracle was love, patient and persistent, breaking through walls of fear and silence and pain. And as the night deepened and the house settled into peaceful sleep, Emma in her bed, dreaming of flowers, Dorothy in the guest room, reading her worn Bible, Richard in his study, looking at photos of his daughter's smile, the miracle continued. Because that's the thing about real miracles. They don't just happen once. They keep happening, day after day, in small moments of grace and hope and love. A girl who couldn't speak learning to sing again. A father who couldn't feel learning to love again. A family that was broken becoming whole again. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and alive and growing. Like a secret garden, locked away for too long, finally opened to the light. Richard Montgomery learned that some things can't be fixed with money. They can only be healed with love, patience, and the courage to believe in second chances. Emma learned that her voice mattered, that her wounds didn't define her, and that healing happens one brave step at a time. And Dorothy, the woman who appeared exactly when she was needed most, reminded them both that miracles aren't about magic. They're about showing up, staying present, and choosing love even when it's hard. In the end, the Black Maid didn't just help Emma find her voice. She helped an entire broken family find their way back to each other. And that was the greatest miracle of all. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more emotional and powerful billionaire stories coming soon.